The morning sun filtered gently through the towering windows of the downtown courthouse, casting long golden stripes across the polished wooden benches. The air was thick with a mix of anticipation, murmuring voices, and the occasional shuffle of papers. The courtroom was unusually crowded for a regular demonstration day. Reporters, photographers, lawyers, and curious spectators had gathered, some seated formally, others leaning against walls, cameras poised to capture the proceedings. It was a busy scene, yet in the midst of the chaos sat a tiny figure who seemed almost out of place. 3-year-old Emma, perched quietly on her mother's lap. Emma was a small child, delicate in stature, with large, inquisitive brown eyes that darted constantly around the room. Her soft hair fell into her face in uneven wisps, which her mother absent-mindedly tucked behind her ear as she tried to keep her attention focused. The girl's tiny fingers fidgeted with the hem of her pink dress, twisting and untwisting the fabric nervously, though her eyes betrayed a keen awareness of everything happening around her. While others were focused on the formality of the courtroom, the stacks of files, the stern faces of attorneys, the rigid posture of the judge, Emma's gaze was locked elsewhere. Across the courtroom, Officer Daniels, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp uniform, prepared his partner for the demonstration. Rex, a sleek, muscular German shepherd, sat obediently at his side, ears twitching with alertness. The dog's black and tan coat gleamed under the overhead lights, and his deep, intelligent eyes scanned the room, taking in the noise, the movement, the faint smell of countless people crammed together. Though Rex was calm, there was a barely perceptible tension in his stance, the subtle coiled readiness of a trained K-9 unit. Emma's fascination with Rex wasn't accidental. Over the past several months, she had spent countless hours visiting the city's K-9 unit, quietly observing Rex's training and learning the subtle signals that could guide him. While most children her age were fascinated by cartoons or toys, Emma had developed an almost magical bond with the dog. She understood the quiet language of gestures, of subtle movements, the tiny nods and tugs that communicated more than words ever could. Today, though, in this formal courtroom filled with strangers, she would finally test that bond in a way that no one, not the judge, not the lawyers, not even Officer Daniels, could anticipate. The room's attention was momentarily stolen by the low murmur of conversation between the prosecuting attorney and his client. Everyone seemed preoccupied with the case at hand, but for Emma, the entire environment was a backdrop. Her eyes followed every twitch of Rex's ears, every step Officer Daniels took, every slight movement of the dog's nose sniffing the air. She leaned slightly forward, her tiny body balancing on her mother's lap, and whispered softly under her breath. The words were inaudible to anyone else, but Rex's ears perked up, and his tail flicked ever so slightly, a signal only Emma could recognize. It wasn't that Emma wanted to disrupt the proceedings. Far from it. She had a quiet, almost innocent purpose, to see if Rex could respond to her secret cues even in a room full of distractions, full of unknown observers. She knew he could. She had trained with him, learned from him, understood him. And yet, the thought of everyone watching made her small heart pound with a mix of excitement and nerves. Her mother rubbed her back gently, whispering soothing words, though she couldn't entirely hide her own tension. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, and even she didn't know exactly how. The judge's gavel struck lightly against the bench, calling the courtroom to attention. The murmurs faded into silence. Cameras clicked in quiet bursts, reporters adjusted microphones, and a faint smell of polished wood and old books filled the air. The anticipation was palpable. Officer Daniels began explaining the demonstration, outlining how Rex could locate hidden items, follow commands, and display obedience that would impress even the most skeptical observers. The audience nodded politely, their interest piqued but tempered by the formality of the setting. They didn't know, could not know, that the true marvel of the day wasn't Rex's training, impressive as it was, but the subtle magic of a tiny girl who had learned to communicate with him in a language all her own. Emma's fingers curled slightly around her mother's hand as she adjusted her position. She caught the eye of Rex across the room. There was a moment, just a flicker of recognition that passed between them. It was instantaneous and silent, a bond forged over months of quiet visits, long afternoons in the K-9 unit, and countless secret training sessions. Her lips moved again, whispering words so soft that not a single adult could hear them, but the dog's response was immediate. He shifted his weight, ears angled toward her, eyes bright and alert. The courtroom continued its hushed anticipation, unaware that a silent communication had just passed between child and canine. Nearby, Officer Daniels glanced at Rex, noticing the unusual reaction. The dog had always been responsive, but there was something different this time, a subtle energy, a shift in posture, a spark of attention that seemed to go beyond ordinary training. He frowned slightly, curiosity mingling with admiration. Meanwhile, Emma's mother's heart thumped in her chest. She had seen this bond grow over weeks, seen Rex respond to the tiniest cues her daughter could offer, but experiencing it in a real courtroom with all eyes upon them was entirely new. The stakes, however innocent they might have seemed, were higher than ever. As the prosecution continued to speak, detailing Rex's obedience exercises, Emma's eyes never left the dog. Her small hand twitched slightly, an imperceptible signal, and the dog responded almost imperceptibly. A tilt of the head, a slight shift in stance, a barely noticeable wag of the tail. To the casual observer, it seemed trivial, meaningless. But to those who knew the secret, it was a moment of connection, a demonstration of understanding that transcended words. Emma's focus never wavered. She was determined, aware that the entire courtroom could watch, yet confident that her tiny gestures would reach Rex across the space, unbroken by noise, distance, or distraction. In the back of the room, a few officers exchanged glances. They had seen Rex perform in countless scenarios, yet something about today felt different. The dog seemed almost attuned to an invisible presence, responsive to a signal no one else could perceive. They whispered softly among themselves, speculating about the unusual energy between child and dog, though no one dared interrupt the formal proceedings. Emma, small and seemingly delicate, held the room's tension in her tiny hands without anyone realizing it. Finally, the moment approached. Officer Daniels prepared to demonstrate Rex's first exercise, locating a small object hidden somewhere in the courtroom. The audience leaned forward, curiosity mixed with skepticism. They expected a standard, well-rehearsed demonstration. Emma, however, had other plans. She positioned herself slightly, whispered her 2 words to Rex, and gave the smallest nod, a gesture so subtle that no one could have noticed if they weren't looking for it. The dog's eyes locked onto her, the tension in his body shifting, his focus sharpening. The courtroom was still calm, the calm before the storm. Everyone's attention was divided between the formalities of the demonstration and the natural curiosity of the moment. Emma's mother held her close, unaware of the precise magic that was about to unfold. A tiny 3-year-old girl, unnoticed by most, was about to stop the courtroom in its tracks. The sun continued to filter through the windows, golden light touching polished surfaces, but nothing in the room could match the quiet, almost imperceptible energy building between Emma and Rex. It was subtle, hidden, magical, and entirely unstoppable. The murmurs in the courtroom softened as Officer Daniels gave a small nod, signaling that Rex was ready for the first exercise. The dog stood perfectly still, ears pricked, muscles coiled yet calm. The audience leaned forward slightly, the formal atmosphere pressing on everyone's shoulders. For most people, this was simply another demonstration of the police dog's skills. But Emma's presence, a tiny figure on her mother's lap, brought a subtle, almost invisible tension into the air. She was not just a spectator. She was a silent participant, and only she and Rex knew the true plan. Rex sniffed the polished floor, his nose twitching as he picked up faint scents lingering in the room. Officer Daniels placed a small object, a wallet carefully concealed somewhere behind the judge's bench. The lawyers whispered quietly among themselves, speculating about the dog's next move. Emma's eyes followed every motion, her body tense with anticipation. She shifted slightly, giving Rex a barely perceptible nod. To anyone else, it was an innocent movement. To Rex, it was a command. His muscles flexed subtly, tail moving with anticipation, ready to act on a signal only Emma could give. The audience watched, some politely clapping at Rex's obedience, others whispering about the training involved. Reporters scribbled notes, ready to file the story of the dog who could find anything. No one noticed the tiny girl sitting quietly on the bench, her lips moving in silent whispers, fingers twitching slightly, cues so subtle they would escape any ordinary observer. Emma's mother glanced down, noticing the intensity in her daughter's gaze. There was something unusual about the interaction between child and dog, but she didn't fully understand it herself. Officer Daniels began the demonstration formally. "Rex, find the hidden item," he commanded, pointing toward the area behind the judge's bench. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not move immediately. A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. Rex, trained as he was, always responded instantly to standard commands. But today his focus remained partially elsewhere, his attention drawn to Emma in the gallery. Emma whispered the two words under her breath again, a quiet encouragement for Rex. With a fluid motion, the dog moved, not directly to the object as expected, but in a path that seemed almost improvisational. Whispers broke out among the audience. "Why isn't he going straight to it?" one lawyer murmured. The judge raised an eyebrow, his gavel tapping lightly against the bench in a subtle sign of impatience. The room had gone from formal anticipation to puzzled curiosity. Everyone watched Rex intently, wondering if there was some hidden training trick at work. Meanwhile, Emma's small hand twitched subtly, a signal invisible to all but Rex. The dog paused for a fraction of a second, sniffed the floor, then pivoted, eyes shining with recognition. This small adjustment, seemingly minor, caused Rex to approach the hidden item differently than planned. He circled, inspecting the surrounding area with precision and care. Every movement was deliberate, almost thoughtful. The courtroom leaned in collectively, sensing the uniqueness of the moment but unable to pinpoint why. Emma's eyes sparkled with quiet satisfaction. She had guided Rex without a single spoken word audible to anyone else. It was a demonstration not of training alone, but of connection, intuition shared between child and dog. As Rex moved closer to the hidden wallet, the murmurs in the room grew louder. Spectators exchanged glances, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Some whispered about the dog's exceptional training, others speculated that Emma might have unknowingly given a signal. Emma, however, was fully aware of her impact. She shifted again, a tiny nod, a subtle lift of her fingers, command so precise that Rex responded instantaneously. Officer Daniels' eyebrows shot up in surprise. Even he had not anticipated such responsiveness in a public setting. The object was located. Rex approached it, paused briefly as if checking with Emma's subtle cues, then picked it up delicately in his jaws and trotted back to Officer Daniels. A collective gasp passed through the courtroom. Applause broke out, but it was cautious, mixed with astonishment. The audience sensed that this was no ordinary demonstration. Something extraordinary had occurred. Emma's secret, invisible to everyone but Rex, had guided the outcome. Her tiny gestures had influenced the dog's behavior in ways no one else could comprehend. Officer Daniels knelt, praising Rex with a soft pat, while his eyes flicked toward Emma. A small, proud smile crossed his face, a silent acknowledgement that the dog's exceptional performance had been enhanced by an extraordinary source, the tiny girl who had sat quietly throughout the proceedings. Emma's mother hugged her gently, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart," though even she could barely grasp the full magnitude of the event. The courtroom had witnessed a perfect synergy between child and canine, one that ordinary explanation. The attention of the room shifted again as the next phase of the demonstration began, a demonstration of Rex's tracking abilities. A small scent trail had been laid out, and Rex was expected to follow it precisely. The spectators were excited but skeptical, Tracking in a controlled setting was impressive, but in a crowded courtroom with distractions, success was far from guaranteed. Emma leaned forward, whispering her familiar two words, and gave Rex the faintest signal. The dog's ears twitched, his stance tightened, and his eyes locked onto her. Once more, he responded to a command that no one else could perceive. As Rex moved along the scent trail, the courtroom watched in rapt attention. The dog's focus was astonishing, navigating between chairs, sidestepping legs, and pausing briefly when necessary, each action guided by a combination of his own training and Emma's imperceptible cues. Lawyers whispered, reporters jotted notes furiously, and spectators held their breath. Everyone was aware that this was no ordinary demonstration, yet no one could articulate exactly why. The connection between child and dog was subtle, invisible, and undeniably powerful. Emma's tiny hands twitched again, and the dog adjusted his pace, circling slightly before continuing. Officer Daniels noticed immediately and allowed a faint smile to cross his face. He realized that today's demonstration had turned into a showcase of something far beyond basic obedience training. Emma's secret instructions had transformed Rex's movements from standard procedure into a silent, elegant performance, a dance between human intuition and canine intelligence. The courtroom remained silent, holding onto every moment as the dog completed his course flawlessly. By the time Rex returned to Officer Daniels, the audience was on edge, unsure whether to applaud or remain silent. Applause erupted tentatively, growing louder as the observers processed what had just occurred. The judge leaned back in his chair, astonishment plain on his face. Lawyers whispered to each other, trying to rationalize what they had witnessed. The media scribbled furiously, sensing the story of a lifetime, though they didn't yet understand the invisible thread connecting Emma and Rex. Emma, however, remained calm, small eyes sparkling with quiet satisfaction. Her secret had worked perfectly, and the room was powerless to interrupt the bond she shared with Rex. Even as the formal demonstration concluded, the courtroom hummed with a new energy. The spectators were now fully invested, eager to see what would happen next. Emma's tiny signals had created a sense of wonder and suspense that no ordinary exercise could match. Every pair of eyes seemed drawn to her, noticing for the first time that this little girl, so small, so quiet, so innocent, had played a pivotal role in a demonstration everyone thought they understood. The court had been transformed from a simple procedural space into a stage of quiet marvel, where the smallest participant held the power to captivate an entire audience. The unexpected guest of the day, a tiny girl with an extraordinary connection to a police dog, had taken center stage. While most of the courtroom believed they had come to witness a demonstration of a trained animal, they had instead witnessed a rare, breathtaking moment of human-animal synergy. Emma had introduced something magical into the room, and though no one yet realized the full extent of her impact, the seed of astonishment had been planted. The anticipation for the next phase of the demonstration grew. Everyone was now aware that anything could happen. The courtroom was thick with tension. Every eye was fixed on Rex as Officer Daniels prepared him for the next demonstration, one that would supposedly be routine, but had now become charged with uncertainty. The murmurs of curiosity and speculation had grown into whispers of anticipation. Emma, small and focused, sat on her mother's lap, her delicate fingers entwined in the fabric of her dress. Her big brown eyes, wide with concentration, never left Rex. She knew that the dog would respond to her, but the room at large was unaware that a quiet, invisible communication was about to transform a routine demonstration into something unforgettable. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, giving him a brief, reassuring scratch behind the ears. "All right, buddy," he murmured softly, "let's show them your tracking skills." Rex's head tilted slightly, ears pricked, eyes scanning the courtroom as he prepared to follow the scent trail laid out moments earlier. Spectators leaned forward, whispering to each other. Cameras clicked with quiet rapidity as reporters tried to capture every moment. To them, this was simply another impressive display of a highly trained police dog. But to Emma, it was the moment of truth. She lifted her tiny hand subtly, giving the faintest signal, a gesture so slight that none of the adults noticed. The signal was a simple, almost imperceptible tilt of her fingers combined with a tiny nod of her head. To anyone else it was nothing, a child fidgeting innocently. To Rex it was a clear command. His body shifted, muscles tensing with anticipation. The courtroom's whispers quieted as the dog paused, sniffed the air, and then moved not in the expected path of the scent trail, but following Emma's silent guidance. The subtle choreography of their interaction was invisible to the casual observer, yet it was precise and deliberate. Emma's lips moved softly, uttering two words under her breath that carried no sound for anyone else, words that only Rex could interpret. Gasps of confusion and curiosity began to ripple through the courtroom. Lawyers whispered to each other, trying to understand the dog's sudden deviation from the expected routine. The judge leaned forward, brow furrowed, clearly intrigued. "Is he supposed to do that?" one officer muttered under his breath. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the dog's unusual movements. Meanwhile, Emma's mother watched her daughter's face, a mix of pride and awe playing across her features. She realized, even in the midst of the courtroom's tension, that Emma had orchestrated this perfectly, guiding Rex without anyone else knowing. Rex moved with an elegant precision that was impossible to ignore. His eyes flicked toward Emma occasionally, as if checking for reassurance. Every step, every pause, every sniff was informed by her secret cues. Emma's gestures were subtle, a slight raise of her hand, a soft lean forward, a barely noticeable nod. The audience saw only a dog performing perfectly, unaware that the small girl was directing each motion with careful attention. Emma's mind was focused entirely on maintaining the connection, ensuring that Rex followed her hidden instructions flawlessly. The hidden object in the courtroom, part of the demonstration, lay behind a stack of legal folders near the judge's bench. The spectators expected Rex to move directly toward it, but the dog took a seemingly indirect path. He paused occasionally, tilting his head as if considering the correct course. Every subtle movement corresponded to one of Emma's hidden cues, her invisible guidance creating a perfect alignment between intention and action. The courtroom grew more tense, realizing that something extraordinary was occurring, yet no one could pinpoint the source of the mystery. A ripple of realization ran through Officer Daniels. He had trained Rex extensively, but he had never seen the dog respond in such a nuanced way under these conditions. The invisible commands from Emma were subtle, almost imperceptible, but Rex interpreted them flawlessly. The officer's expression shifted from surprise to admiration. He leaned slightly toward the audience, trying to maintain the demonstration's formality, yet he could not hide his amazement at the extraordinary bond between child and dog. Emma's mother's hand squeezed her daughter gently, whispering encouragement. She marveled at the precision of Emma's gestures, the quiet confidence in her tiny frame. Though only 3 years old, Emma was orchestrating a performance that held an entire courtroom captive. She had spent months learning Rex's cues, understanding his subtle responses, and practicing the silent communication that now amazed everyone. The small gestures that adults overlooked were powerful commands to the dog, each one executed with flawless obedience and timing. Spectators leaned forward, whispers growing into audible chatter. "Look at the dog," one attorney exclaimed quietly. "He's responding differently." Cameras clicked. The judge frowned slightly, uncertain what to make of the unusual behavior. "Proceed carefully," he said, voice low but firm, his attention fixed on the unfolding moment. The courtroom was quiet again, tension building, as the audience waited to see what Rex would do next. Emma's confidence never wavered. Her small body was poised, her eyes locked on the dog, every motion deliberate and precise. Then with a subtle shift, Rex approached the hidden object. He paused momentarily as if seeking confirmation. Emma's small nod was enough. The dog carefully lifted the item, delicately grasping it in his jaws. The courtroom erupted not with a roar but with stunned silence, followed by whispered exclamations of astonishment. The audience's collective breath seemed to stop. Cameras clicked wildly, capturing every moment. The judge leaned back in his chair, visibly taken aback, realizing he had witnessed something entirely unexpected. The whispers grew louder. Spectators speculated, unsure what had just occurred. Was it extraordinary training, luck, or something else entirely? Emma's mother held her daughter tightly, her chest swelling with pride. She whispered softly, "You did it, sweetheart," even though she knew the true depth of Emma's accomplishment was still invisible to everyone else. Officer Daniels patted Rex gently, his eyes meeting Emma across the room. He understood, silently, that the dog's impeccable performance was guided not by commands he had given, but by the quiet, invisible cues of the tiny girl who had captivated an entire courtroom. Emma's lips moved again, uttering the two words she had memorized for this moment. Rex responded instantly, tilting his head and giving a small bark of acknowledgement, perfectly timed with her silent command. The courtroom had reached a standstill. Every adult in the room, from the judge to the reporters, was caught in the spell of this extraordinary interaction. No one could explain why Rex acted as he did. Only Emma and the dog knew the truth. The tiny girl had orchestrated a moment that expectation, leaving the audience simultaneously bewildered and mesmerized. The judge finally cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room, but even his authority could not undo the magic of what had occurred. Lawyers whispered among themselves, struggling to rationalize the event. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing details for stories they could barely describe. Officers exchanged glances, admiration in their eyes. Rex returned to Officer Daniels, still attentive, eyes glimmering with the recognition of a bond that no observer could see. Emma smiled quietly, satisfied. Her secret had worked flawlessly, and the room, captivated, had no idea who had truly directed the extraordinary sequence. By the end of the demonstration, the courtroom was alive with awe and speculation. People were buzzing, trying to understand the tiny, invisible hand that had guided Rex. Cameras and recorders had captured the dog's flawless performance, but the essence of the event, the subtle communication between a tiny girl and a highly trained police dog, remained hidden to all but a few. Emma's presence had transformed a standard demonstration into a memorable spectacle, a story that would be retold for years. Even as Officer Daniels praised Rex and the girl quietly watched, the courtroom's energy had shifted. No longer were they merely observers of a police dog demonstration. They were witnesses to something magical, a connection that transcended training and skill. Emma, a 3-year-old with a quiet confidence and extraordinary intuition, had taken the attention of an entire courtroom and held it in her hands. She was small, seemingly delicate, yet her impact was immense, leaving everyone present both astonished and profoundly curious about the bond between child and dog. The murmurs and whispers continued, growing louder as the demonstration ended. But Emma remained focused, quietly satisfied with her accomplishment. She had proven something remarkable today. Even the smallest among us can command attention, influence outcomes, and inspire awe when guided by intelligence, courage, and an extraordinary connection. And while the courtroom tried to process what they had witnessed, Emma and Rex shared a quiet, invisible understanding that would remain their secret, a bond stronger than anything the room could imagine. The courtroom had never been quieter, yet it seemed as though the air itself was charged with electricity. Every spectator, from the seasoned lawyers to the curious onlookers, held their breath, collectively straining to comprehend what they had just witnessed. A tiny 3-year-old girl, Emma, had subtly directed a highly trained police dog, Rex, to locate a hidden object in a manner that all expectations. There was a stunned pause in the room, as if time itself had slowed, giving everyone a moment to process the seemingly impossible. The judge, a stern man with decades of courtroom experience, raised an eyebrow, peering down from his elevated bench. His gavel rested idly in front of him, forgotten. The courtroom, usually a place of rigid procedure and decorum, had become a stage of wonder. He glanced around at the lawyers and officers, searching for an explanation, any clue that could rationalize the extraordinary sequence he had just witnessed. Whispers spread like wildfire, each person trying to make sense of the tiny girl's influence on Rex. One of the lawyers, a tall man with dark hair streaked with gray, leaned toward his colleague. "Did you see that? The dog didn't just follow the standard path. He responded to her gestures." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. The colleague nodded slowly, equally captivated, noting the precision and timing with which Rex had executed every move. Cameras from reporters across the courtroom clicked furiously, capturing footage that would soon flood the news channels, but none could reveal the secret: Emma's tiny, invisible guidance. Officer Daniels, still kneeling beside Rex, allowed a small, incredulous smile to creep across his face. He had trained the dog extensively, but he had never witnessed anything quite like this. Rex's obedience, while impeccable in training exercises, now seemed infused with something extraordinary, something beyond standard commands, a subtle intelligence linked to the small, quiet girl sitting in the gallery. The bond they shared was invisible, yet undeniably present. Daniels looked at Emma, admiration and surprise mingling in his expression. "Remarkable," he whispered under his breath. The spectators' reactions grew more pronounced. Some whispered to neighbors, exchanging theories. "How did she do that?" one woman asked, her eyes wide. "She's barely old enough to talk, and yet the dog obeyed her like magic." A group of young law clerks at the back of the room murmured excitedly among themselves, their pens poised to take notes for the story they already knew would go viral. Even the court reporters, who were used to meticulously documenting mundane legal proceedings, looked up from their notebooks, sensing that they were witnessing something exceptional. Emma's mother, seated quietly beside her daughter, watched with a mix of pride, awe, and a hint of nervousness. She squeezed Emma's tiny hand gently, whispering soft encouragements. "You're amazing," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. Though proud, she also realized the uniqueness of what had just occurred, a bond between child and dog that no one in the courtroom could understand fully. Emma, calm and composed, simply smiled faintly, her eyes still locked on Rex, who now sat obediently beside Officer Daniels, awaiting the next cue. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor and meticulous adherence to courtroom procedure, found himself momentarily captivated. His hands rested on the bench, gavel still idle, as he observed the girl and the dog. Something had happened here that transcended ordinary rules, ordinary training, and ordinary expectation. For a brief moment, the courtroom was suspended in awe, a collective silence that spoke volumes about the uniqueness of the moment. Emma's presence, so small yet so commanding, had transformed an everyday demonstration into something unforgettable. Whispers turned into murmurs of speculation. Could it be some sort of hidden training? One young reporter suggested under her breath. Another replied, "No, it's like the dog understood her, like they have their own secret language." The murmurs grew louder, capturing the curiosity and imagination of everyone present. Emma's subtle gestures, almost invisible to the casual observer, had become the focal point of a room full of adults, professionals, and law enforcement officers, all struggling to comprehend how such a tiny figure could hold so much influence. Officer Daniels addressed the courtroom formally, attempting to restore a sense of order. "Ladies and," he said, his voice calm yet tinged with astonishment, "Rex is a highly trained police dog. Today's demonstration was designed to show his obedience and tracking skills. However," he paused, his eyes flicking toward Emma, acknowledging the subtle, undeniable influence she had exerted. "It seems that some moments are remarkable not just because of training, but because of extraordinary connections that inspire awe." The audience exchanged stunned glances, realizing the truth in his words. The dog, Rex, remained calm but alert, eyes occasionally flicking toward Emma as if waiting for the next cue. Even in this moment of public attention, his focus was unwavering. The invisible line of communication between the girl and the dog had not been broken by the noise, the crowd, or the unfamiliar setting. It was a testament to their bond, refined through months of practice, patience, and understanding. Emma's tiny body radiated quiet confidence, showing that even a child could wield influence in the most extraordinary ways. Some spectators, unable to contain their curiosity, leaned forward, studying the girl closely. "Did you see the gesture?" a woman whispered to her companion. Her fingers moved slightly, and the dog adjusted instantly. "I've never seen anything like it." The murmurs spread across the courtroom, each person attempting to articulate the inexplicable connection they had just witnessed. Cameras continued to click, and reporters furiously scribbled notes, but none could capture the subtle nuances. The two-word cue, the faint nod, the nearly invisible gestures that guided Rex so perfectly. Emma's mother continued to offer quiet encouragement, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. She marveled at the precision with which Emma had orchestrated the entire demonstration, entirely unseen by everyone else. There was a magic in the moment, something intangible, a mixture of intelligence, courage, and trust that radiated from the smallest figure in the courtroom. Emma, calm and focused, had turned what could have been an ordinary day into a moment of shared astonishment that no one would forget. The judge finally tapped his gavel lightly, attempting to regain a semblance of control. "Order," he said, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "Let us proceed with the demonstration." Yet even as the proceedings continued, the atmosphere remained electrified. The courtroom had been transformed. A tiny girl had commanded attention not through volume, not through force, but through subtlety, intelligence, and a remarkable bond with a police dog. The audience, captivated and awed, could not look away. Whispers turned into admiration. Lawyers exchanged nods of acknowledgement. Officers smiled faintly, recognizing that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. Even the reporters, usually seeking sensational headlines, paused to absorb the moment, understanding that they were documenting something rare. The quiet power of a child's influence, amplified through an extraordinary connection with an intelligent animal. The courtroom, once filled with routine procedure, had become a theater of wonder, where everyone, judge, lawyers, spectators, and officers alike, had become witnesses to an almost magical interaction. Rex, obedient and focused, returned to Officer Daniel's side, the hidden object now retrieved and the demonstration technically complete. But the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly. No one could forget the precision, the timing, or the subtle yet powerful influence of the tiny girl who had orchestrated it all. Emma's calm smile, her eyes shining with quiet satisfaction, was a reminder that even the smallest, quietest participants could create moments of profound impact. By the time the courtroom resumed its formal rhythm, murmurs of astonishment persisted. Reporters whispered excitedly among themselves. Lawyers and officers shook their heads in disbelief. Emma's mother hugged her daughter softly, whispering words of pride and encouragement. The tiny girl had done something remarkable. She had taken a room full of adults, lawyers, and law enforcement officers, and held their attention entirely with her intelligence, her courage, and her extraordinary bond with Rex. It was a moment that would linger long after the day ended. Even as the next phase of the demonstration approached, the courtroom could not shake the sense of awe that hung in the air. Emma, small and seemingly delicate, had commanded not just a dog, but the attention, curiosity, and admiration of everyone present. The atmosphere was charged, the tension palpable, and every observer knew that what they had seen was rare, something beyond ordinary explanation. And as Rex awaited the next cue, eyes flicking toward Emma, it was clear that the magic was far from over. The courtroom still buzzed with whispers and speculation, but for Emma, the world had narrowed to a single focus: Rex. Her 3-year-old mind, sharp and alert beyond her years, had been trained in quiet, subtle communication with the police dog over the past several months. What no one in the courtroom knew, not the judge, not the lawyers, not the reporters or spectators, was that every movement Emma made, every slight gesture, every whisper of 2 words under her breath, had a precise purpose. Rex was not just a trained animal. He was her partner, her companion, and her pupil in a secret language that only they could understand. Emma's bond with Rex had not begun in the courtroom. It started in the K-9 unit, a place usually closed to the public. During her visits, she had observed the officers training the dogs with meticulous precision. Rex, in particular, had caught her attention. Unlike other dogs, he seemed to respond not just to commands, but to intention. He noticed subtle movements, tiny shifts in posture, and the almost imperceptible changes in the energy of those around him. Emma, naturally observant and quick to learn, had begun experimenting with these cues, slowly discovering that she could communicate with Rex using signals so quiet and subtle that no one else could perceive them. Her secret language with Rex was a combination of gestures, slight nods, and whispers. Each motion had a specific meaning. A tilt of her fingers might direct him to pause. A lean forward could indicate a change in direction. 2 whispered words, spoken softly under her breath, might command him to locate something or adjust his focus. Over weeks, months even, she had honed these skills with patience and precision. It was a discipline that required attention, subtlety, and above all, trust. And today, in the courtroom filled with strangers and tension, her secret communication had shone brilliantly. The audience remained unaware of the complexity behind what they had witnessed. To them, Rex's actions seemed extraordinary but inexplicable. A police dog executing commands flawlessly was impressive in itself, but responding in such nuanced ways to an invisible guide. That conventional understanding. Officers in the room, even those who had trained Rex, exchanged glances filled with astonishment. They could see the results, but the cause, Emma's silent, precise guidance, was invisible to all but a select few. Emma's mother watched her daughter with a mixture of pride, awe, and mild anxiety. She had been present during all of Emma's training sessions with Rex, understanding the bond that had developed between them. But seeing it play out in a public courtroom, with dozens of strangers observing, was an entirely different experience. She could see Emma's focus, the subtle movements of her tiny hands and head, and the soft whispers of encouragement. She could see the trust between child and dog, an unspoken understanding that transcended words and commands. The hidden intelligence behind Emma's actions became clearer as Rex executed the final part of the demonstration. The dog, guided entirely by her invisible cues, completed each task with a precision that exceeded even the trained expectations of the officers. Every movement, from the pause to the pivot to the final retrieval of the hidden object, was a direct result of Emma's careful guidance. The courtroom, captivated by the outcome, had no idea that the real marvel was not Rex's obedience, but Emma's brilliance and quiet confidence. Officer Daniels, kneeling beside Rex, finally spoke aloud, his voice carrying a note of astonishment. This is incredible," he said quietly, so that only a few nearby could hear. "I've trained Rex for years and he's responsive to many people, but he has never followed commands with such subtlety, precision, and trust as he has today with Emma. She's remarkable." The words were met with silent agreement from those who had witnessed the interaction closely. It was one thing to train a dog through repetition and discipline. It was another entirely to guide him with invisible intelligence that was both intuitive and deliberate. Emma's own face reflected quiet pride. She did not need applause or recognition. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had successfully communicated with Rex, orchestrating a flawless demonstration under pressure and in a distracting, public environment. Her confidence was quiet but unmistakable. She had studied Rex's movements, understood his responses, and anticipated his reactions. In many ways, the success of the demonstration was as much a testament to her intellect and patience as it was to the dog's training. The courtroom remained tense, still processing what had just occurred. Spectators whispered, trying to decipher the sequence of events. "It's almost like he understands her," one whispered. "Yes," replied another, "like they have some secret connection no one else can see." The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of disbelief and admiration. Emma's hidden intelligence, combined with her careful guidance of Rex, had created a spectacle that would be remembered long after the day ended. Even the judge, recovering from his initial astonishment, leaned forward again, observing the interaction closely. His stern demeanor softened as he watched the quiet precision of Emma's gestures and Rex's immediate responses. "Remarkable," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He recognized that what he had witnessed was not just a demonstration of skill, but of extraordinary intelligence and connection. The courtroom, a place usually governed by rules and procedure, had become a stage for brilliance and wonder. Rex, sensing the calm approval from both Emma and Officer Daniels, sat obediently, tail wagging slightly, eyes bright and attentive. He seemed aware that the demonstration had not only succeeded but had exceeded every expectation. The invisible dialogue between the girl and the dog had guided him perfectly, and he responded with unwavering trust. Emma's intelligence, expressed through the subtle art of communication, had turned a routine exercise into a moment of shared triumph. Observers continued to speculate. Some wondered if there had been some trick or manipulation. Others accepted it as a remarkable display of training. None, however, could truly grasp the depth of the invisible partnership between Emma and Rex. It was a partnership built on trust, patience, and an extraordinary understanding of nonverbal communication. It was a rare gift, a subtle genius in a small, 3-year-old body, expressed not through words or demonstration, but through quiet guidance and careful observation. Emma's mother whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You've amazed them all," she said, pride shining in her voice. Emma merely smiled, her eyes flicking briefly toward Rex, who looked back with the unwavering devotion of a partner who understood every gesture and intention. The magic of the moment was simple yet profound. Intelligence, trust, and connection could transcend age, size, and expectation. As the courtroom slowly settled, the murmurs and whispers continuing in subdued tones, it became clear that what Emma had accomplished was more than a demonstration. It was a revelation of hidden intelligence, a testament to the power of subtle communication, and an inspiring display of what could be achieved when patience, observation, and trust worked together. The tiniest participant in the room had held the attention of everyone present, proving that brilliance could come in the most unexpected forms. Even Officer Daniels, the seasoned K-9 officer, shook his head in amazement. "I've trained dogs for years," he said quietly to a nearby officer, "but I've never seen a child guide one with such precision. She's extraordinary." The murmurs of the crowd agreed silently. The courtroom had witnessed not only the obedience of a dog, but the intelligence and capability of a child whose skills went unnoticed until now. By the time the next portion of the demonstration was set to begin, the room had shifted in energy. Observers were no longer passive. Their attention was fully captured, and their curiosity heightened. Everyone wanted to see what Emma could do next, how she might guide Rex through the exercises with the same quiet genius she had displayed moments ago. The bond between the girl and the dog had transformed the courtroom from a place of procedural observation into a theater of human and animal collaboration. Emma, calm and composed, adjusted slightly on her mother's lap. Her fingers twitched in preparation for the next subtle signal, her eyes shining with quiet confidence. She understood the gravity of the moment, but her small smile suggested she enjoyed the challenge. Rex, alert and focused, seemed equally prepared, his muscles taut with anticipation, ready to respond to cues that no one else could perceive. Together, they were a team invisible yet undeniable, subtle yet extraordinary. And so, as the courtroom waited with bated breath, Emma's hidden intelligence became the centerpiece of the day's proceedings. The tiny girl who had initially seemed so delicate, so insignificant in the grand formal setting of the courthouse, had revealed a remarkable talent, captivating everyone present. Through subtle gestures, whispered words, and unwavering focus, she had demonstrated that intelligence and skill were not defined by age or size. Emma's secret, invisible yet undeniable, had transformed an ordinary demonstration into a moment of unforgettable wonder. The courtroom had reached a tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Every whisper, every shifting of a chair, every quiet shuffle of papers seemed amplified in the hushed space. The audience, now fully captivated, was no longer merely observing a demonstration. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something that seemed almost impossible. The tiny girl, Emma, had already guided Rex through a flawless series of tasks, her subtle gestures and whispered commands leaving the room in stunned silence. And yet, the most pivotal moment was about to occur. Rex stood beside Officer Daniels, ears twitching, muscles coiled with readiness. The next task had been described by the officers as routine: locate a hidden person in the back of the courtroom. A volunteer from the audience had been asked to participate, a young law clerk who had been instructed to sit quietly behind a partition. The crowd leaned forward, expecting a simple demonstration of the dog's tracking abilities. They did not know that Emma's invisible hand would once again guide the dog in ways no one could foresee. Emma, small and focused, adjusted her position slightly on her mother's lap. Her fingers twitched, a subtle nod of her head followed by a tiny lift of her chin, her silent cues ready to guide Rex. She whispered the two words she had memorized for the moment, her voice soft enough that only the dog could hear them. The courtroom remained oblivious to the secret dialogue taking place in front of them. Every adult present assumed that Rex would act according to Officer Daniels' commands alone. They had no idea that Emma's quiet intelligence had become the invisible force directing the proceedings. Rex paused for a moment, sniffing the air as if sensing the hidden presence. Then, almost imperceptibly, his head tilted toward Emma, a subtle acknowledgement of her guidance. He moved forward, scanning the space with precision. The spectators leaned forward, eyes wide, some whispering excitedly, some remaining silent in awe. The judges, lawyers, reporters, and officers all had frozen, watching with bated breath. Even those familiar with Rex's capabilities could not anticipate the grace and exactness of his next movements, unaware of the silent commands propelling him. Emma's gestures were minute but deliberate. She lifted her tiny hand slightly, signaling Rex to pause. He obeyed instantly, stopping mid-step, ears alert, eyes bright. A faint tilt of her head and he shifted his stance, adjusting his trajectory by mere inches. Every motion was calculated, every subtle movement orchestrated with precision. The audience watched, mesmerized, sensing the dog's extraordinary responsiveness, though they could not understand its source. Whispers broke out again. "He's following some invisible command," someone murmured. "Yes, but whose?" another replied. The young law clerk volunteer, unaware of the hidden guidance, remained still, slightly nervous as the dog approached. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing each precise step Rex took. The audience could see only the dog's impeccable training, unaware that the tiny girl on her mother's lap was the one orchestrating every detail. Her mind, sharp beyond her years, anticipated every potential distraction: the shuffle of papers, the movement of spectators, the faint sound of murmuring voices, and accounted for them in advance. She was a quiet mastermind, guiding her partner with patience, intelligence, and absolute clarity. As Rex approached the partition, he paused, sniffing carefully. Emma's hand twitched ever so slightly, a signal he understood immediately. He stepped to the side, circling the hidden volunteer with perfect timing. The crowd gasped softly, recognizing the dog's unusual yet flawless navigation. To the spectators, it seemed as though Rex were moving with an awareness beyond ordinary training, as if he could perceive things invisible to everyone else. Emma's gestures, so subtle that they were imperceptible to all but Rex, had transformed the dog's movements into an almost magical performance. Officer Daniels allowed a faint smile to cross his face. He had trained Rex extensively, yet he had never seen the dog respond with such subtlety and perfection in a public setting. The invisible communication between Emma and Rex was extraordinary, an unspoken language of trust and intuition. Even the most experienced officers recognized that this was not simply obedience. It was synergy, a rare and breathtaking collaboration between human and animal. The courtroom remained captivated. Every spectator, lawyer, and reporter seemed suspended in the moment, unable to look away. Cameras clicked, capturing the dog's every movement, but the footage alone could not convey the subtle cues, the silent words, the minute gestures that had guided him. Emma's tiny frame held the weight of the entire performance, her intelligence and focus radiating through the subtle choreography of her hand signals and whispered commands. Finally, Rex located the volunteer, gently indicating the hidden position without startling or harming the person. The courtroom collectively exhaled. Some whispered in awe, others clapped quietly, still unsure how to process what they had seen. Even the judge leaned back slightly, gavel in hand, marveling at the precision and timing. "Remarkable," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Absolutely remarkable." Emma's mother hugged her daughter tightly, whispering words of pride and encouragement. She had watched this bond develop over months of patient observation and practice, but seeing it unfold in the courtroom, with dozens of people watching, was unlike anything she had imagined. Her daughter's confidence, intelligence, and subtle guidance had turned a routine demonstration into a moment of awe-inspiring brilliance. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "Good job, buddy. Incredible work." Rex wagged his tail slightly, eyes glimmering as if aware that he had accomplished something extraordinary, guided by the smallest hand in the room. Emma's tiny nod of approval met the dog's gaze, reinforcing the bond that had made this achievement possible. The invisible connection they shared had transformed the ordinary into something unforgettable. Whispers of astonishment spread throughout the courtroom. Spectators speculated about the dog's unusual responsiveness. "Did you see that pause? It was as if he understood something no one else did," one lawyer murmured. "Yes," replied another, "and the way he adjusted his path extraordinary. But how?" The answer, of course, was invisible to them. Only Emma and Rex knew the truth. It was her intelligence, patience, and quiet guidance that had orchestrated every detail. The energy in the room shifted subtly. The audience was no longer merely curious. They were enthralled, caught in a moment that felt almost sacred. Cameras continued to click, reporters scribbled furiously, and even the officers who had trained Rex were visibly moved. The tiny girl, so small and seemingly delicate, had captured the attention of everyone in the room without speaking a word audible to the crowd. Her presence, focus, and intelligence had elevated a standard demonstration into a performance of rare wonder. As the demonstration concluded, Rex returned to Officer Daniels, sitting obediently by his side, eyes flicking toward Emma as if seeking acknowledgement. The crowd erupted in soft applause, hesitant at first, then growing louder as the realization of what they had witnessed settled in. Even the judge, who had been initially skeptical, gave a small nod of approval, acknowledging the extraordinary skill and intelligence displayed. Emma's tiny hands rested calmly on her lap, her eyes shining with quiet satisfaction. The courtroom had been brought to a standstill, not by words, not by spectacle, but by the subtle, intelligent guidance of a child. Emma had orchestrated the demonstration flawlessly, turning what could have been an ordinary exercise into a moment of universal astonishment. Her intelligence, patience, and unwavering focus had commanded attention in a room full of professionals, reporters, and observers, leaving everyone in silent admiration. For a moment there was complete stillness. The audience collectively exhaled, the room buzzing softly with wonder and speculation. Emma's tiny fingers twitched once, just slightly, as she acknowledged Rex's performance. The dog, obedient and proud, responded with a gentle tilt of his head, a silent communication between partners who understood each other perfectly. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a bond that transcended ordinary explanation, a quiet genius displayed through subtlety and trust. Even as murmurs of astonishment spread, the effect of the moment lingered. People whispered to each other, sharing theories, speculating about the child's role. None could fully comprehend the invisible connection between Emma and Rex. The demonstration, while complete, had left the audience suspended in awe, a rare moment in which ordinary expectations were completely overturned. Emma's tiny frame had commanded attention, orchestrated precision, and created wonder, all without a single audible word. The standstill had lasted mere minutes, but to those present it felt like a lifetime. Every gesture, every pause, every subtle cue had contributed to an experience that explanation. The courtroom, once a place of routine procedure, had been transformed into a stage of extraordinary intelligence, trust, and human-animal collaboration. Emma, small and quiet, had proven that brilliance could manifest in even the tiniest, most unexpected forms. The courtroom was still vibrating with a residual energy that had transformed the space from a place of procedure to a theater of astonishment. Every observer, from the sternest judge to the youngest clerk, was still processing what they had just witnessed. Emma, seated quietly on her mother's lap, remained composed, her tiny frame radiating calm confidence. Yet her subtle gestures and whispered cues had orchestrated an extraordinary performance, one that had left the room in awe and temporarily suspended the normal rhythm of the proceedings. Officer Daniels finally broke the tension, addressing the courtroom with a quiet but firm tone. "Ladies and," he began, "you have witnessed something beyond ordinary training. Rex is a highly skilled K-9 officer, but his performance today was influenced by a unique bond, one that transcends words and commands." The audience leaned in, their curiosity heightened. Everyone in the room sensed that a secret had just been revealed, even if the full extent of it was not yet known. All eyes shifted toward Emma. At first, the realization seemed almost impossible to comprehend. She was tiny, barely 3 years old, yet she had quietly guided a fully trained police dog through a series of complex tasks. The crowd began to murmur in awe, whispers spreading like wildfire. "It was her," someone said softly, pointing toward the girl. "She was giving the commands, was she?" Another observer nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, that explains everything. How else could Rex respond with such precision?" Even the judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench as he studied Emma. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Remarkable," he murmured under his breath. He motioned for a brief pause, allowing the room to settle, giving everyone a moment to acknowledge what had transpired. The murmurs of speculation transformed into soft applause as people slowly began to recognize the child's extraordinary contribution. The courtroom, once filled with routine expectation, now celebrated ingenuity, intuition, and an invisible yet undeniable intelligence. Emma's mother held her daughter tightly, whispering words of pride. "You've amazed them all," she said softly. Emma's response was a quiet nod and a small smile, her focus still partially on Rex. The bond between them was unbroken, an invisible tether that had guided the dog flawlessly through each task. The mother marveled at her daughter's composure and intelligence, realizing that what the audience witnessed was the result of months of practice, observation, and patience, a secret skill that Emma had honed with dedication beyond her years. Officer Daniels stood, gently patting Rex on the head. "You did it, buddy," he said, his voice tinged with pride. The dog responded with a subtle wag of the tail, eyes bright and alert. The demonstration had not only shown the dog's abilities but had revealed a hidden layer of guidance and intelligence that came from an unlikely source. Emma, the tiny girl seated in the gallery, had become the center of attention not because she demanded it, but because her skill and quiet leadership made it unavoidable. Reporters, previously focused on capturing Rex's movements, now shifted their attention to Emma. Cameras clicked, capturing the expression of wonder on her face, the subtle confidence in her gestures, and the quiet command she held over the dog. Questions buzzed in their minds. How had she learned to communicate so effectively with Rex? How could someone so young exert such influence without speaking audibly? The audience, media, and courtroom personnel all recognized that they had witnessed something rare, an invisible, almost magical communication between child and animal. One of the lawyers, still processing the sequence of events, spoke quietly to his colleague. "It's incredible. The dog responded perfectly to invisible cues. There's no way it was coincidence." His colleague nodded. "Yes, it's clear she has an intuitive understanding of the dog's behavior. It's like a secret language only they share." The room was filled with a collective admiration, a recognition that this was not ordinary training or performance, but something extraordinary, subtle, and deeply intelligent. Even the judge finally acknowledged the child formally. "Young lady," he said, directing his attention to Emma, "your understanding and composure today have been remarkable. You have demonstrated intelligence, patience, and a bond with Rex that is extraordinary. The courtroom thanks you for sharing this display with us." Emma's mother's chest swelled with pride as her daughter responded with a small, polite nod, her eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. The applause that followed was genuine, heartfelt, and reverent, the kind reserved for witnessing something truly exceptional. Officer Daniel stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pride and amazement. "Emma has been training with Rex for months," he explained to the room, his voice calm yet carrying undeniable admiration. "What you saw today was not just the obedience of a trained K9. It was the result of a partnership, a silent communication, and an intelligence that few can comprehend. This young lady has a remarkable ability to guide and inspire, even in a high-pressure environment like this courtroom." The audience absorbed his words, nodding in understanding, many still whispering to each other in disbelief. Emma herself remained composed, her eyes flicking occasionally toward Rex, who sat patiently by Officer Daniel's side. There was no vanity in her demeanor, only quiet confidence and a deep connection with her canine partner. Every movement, every whisper, every subtle nod had been deliberate. She had orchestrated the entire demonstration flawlessly, capturing the attention and admiration of everyone in the room. To the crowd, it seemed magical. To Emma, it was simply the result of careful observation, intelligence, and trust. The audience's reaction deepened as the subtlety of her skill became clearer. Even trained officers and seasoned lawyers recognized that the precision with which Rex had executed his tasks was beyond what could be expected from standard obedience. Emma had created a scenario in which the dog performed flawlessly under pressure, responding not to direct commands from Officer Daniels, but to invisible, subtle signals only she could provide. The courtroom, buzzing with whispered speculation, recognized the unique brilliance of the tiny girl who had orchestrated it all. Whispers spread, "She's a prodigy. Unbelievable for someone so young. How did she learn to communicate like that?" Cameras continued to click, reporters scribbled furiously, and spectators leaned forward, eager to witness more. Emma's quiet composure remained unchanged. She understood the significance of the moment but remained focused, calm, and entirely in control. Her intelligence, her patience, and her ability to guide Rex had elevated an ordinary demonstration into something extraordinary, capturing the attention and admiration of every adult in the room. Even those who were skeptical initially had begun to realize the full impact of what they had witnessed. The subtle gestures, the whispered words, the perfect timing of Rex's movements, all of it pointed to a level of intelligence and capability that expectation. Emma's tiny figure, seemingly fragile yet brimming with quiet strength, had orchestrated a flawless performance that no one could ignore. The courtroom had been transformed from a space of procedural formality into a stage of awe, wonder, and admiration. As the demonstration concluded, the energy in the room shifted from tension to celebration. The judge, officers, lawyers, and spectators all recognized the extraordinary nature of Emma's role. Applause filled the space, tentative at first, then growing louder as the significance of her contribution sank in. Emma, calm and modest, accepted the acknowledgement with a quiet nod, her eyes meeting Rex, in a silent moment of mutual understanding. The bond they shared had captivated everyone present, turning a simple demonstration into a memorable and inspiring event. Officer Daniels, still kneeling beside Rex, spoke once more. "Today, you've witnessed more than obedience," he said, gesturing toward Emma. "You've seen the intelligence, patience, and subtlety of a young mind capable of guiding and inspiring. Emma's connection with Rex is extraordinary, and it has turned an ordinary demonstration into something unforgettable." The room responded with renewed applause, a collective recognition of the hidden brilliance that had guided every movement, every decision, and every successful outcome of the demonstration. Even after the official proceedings concluded, whispers of awe persisted. Spectators discussed what they had seen in hushed tones, reporters jotted notes feverishly, and officers exchanged nods of respect. Emma's quiet intelligence had been the driving force behind a demonstration that would be remembered for years. She had captivated, inspired, and amazed everyone present, not through force or volume, but through subtlety, skill, and an extraordinary bond with Rex. The courtroom had been transformed, not by spectacle, but by the quiet genius of a small girl. Emma's tiny gestures, whispered cues, and unwavering focus had demonstrated a level of intelligence and capability that exceeded all expectations. The audience, fully aware of the significance of the moment, recognized that they had witnessed something rare, inspiring, and unforgettable. Emma had not only guided a police dog flawlessly, she had captured the attention, admiration, and respect of everyone in the room, leaving an indelible mark on their minds. The courtroom, once a stage for routine legal proceedings, had transformed into a theater of wonder. Every spectator, officer, lawyer, and reporter felt the weight of what they had just witnessed. A tiny girl, no older than 3, had orchestrated a flawless demonstration with a fully trained police dog, Rex, using subtle gestures and whispered cues that no one else could perceive. The room buzzed with admiration, astonishment, and a shared sense that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Emma's mother embraced her daughter gently, whispering softly, "You were incredible." Emma simply smiled, her small hands resting calmly on her lap, eyes still bright with satisfaction. She did not seek recognition, nor did she need applause to validate her success. Her pride came from the quiet knowledge that she had achieved something remarkable, guiding her partner, Rex, with precision and intelligence, leaving the courtroom in awe without uttering a single audible command. Officer Daniels stepped forward, his expression a mixture of pride, awe, and professionalism. "Ladies and," he addressed the room, "what you've witnessed today is more than a demonstration of a police dog's skill. It's a demonstration of extraordinary trust, intelligence, and communication between a child and her canine partner. Emma has shown us the power of patience, observation, and subtle guidance, qualities that are remarkable in anyone, let alone someone so young." His words were met with a renewed wave of applause, soft at first, then swelling as the audience recognized the depth of her achievement. The judge, still seated behind his bench, finally spoke formally. His voice carried authority but also wonder. "This courtroom has seen many demonstrations and performances over the years," he said, "but few have left such a profound impression. Emma, your composure, intelligence, and ability to guide Rex have demonstrated something truly remarkable. You have taught all of us, officers, lawyers, reporters, and spectators alike, that brilliance is not measured by age, size, or experience, but by observation, focus, and heart." A quiet hush followed, as the weight of his words sank in. Emma's gaze met Rex's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The dog wagged his tail slightly, as if recognizing the praise indirectly meant for both of them. The courtroom's awe shifted subtly from astonishment at her actions to appreciation for the unique bond they shared. It was a relationship built on trust, patience, and mutual understanding, one that allowed a tiny girl to orchestrate a flawless performance in a high-pressure environment. Their connection was invisible to most, yet undeniably real and powerful. Reporters approached, eager to capture quotes, images, and interviews. "Emma, how did you guide Rex so perfectly?" one asked, her voice curious and gentle. Emma, shy yet confident, tilted her head slightly and whispered softly to her mother, who relayed her words. "I just told him where to go," her mother said, smiling. "We practiced together." The simplicity of her explanation belied the complexity of what had just occurred. But those who understood, Officer Daniels, the judge, and a few observant spectators, realized that months of patience, observation, and quiet learning had culminated in a performance that seemed effortless. Spectators crowded around, still whispering in awe. Lawyers and clerks who had witnessed countless courtroom events shook their heads in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it," one murmured. "A 3-year-old directing a trained police dog with such precision, it defies logic." Another nodded, adding, "It's not just the dog's obedience, it's the intelligence behind the guidance. That child is extraordinary." Cameras continued to click, capturing both Rex's poise and Emma's serene confidence. The story, both visual and emotional, was already unfolding as an unforgettable moment in the lives of everyone present. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, patting his head affectionately. "We've trained together for years, buddy, and you've done exceptionally well," he said softly. Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, his eyes flicking toward Emma. The invisible partnership between the two was complete, a bond that had been tested and proven under the scrutiny of an entire courtroom. The dog's precision, responsiveness, and attentiveness were all reflections of Emma's subtle intelligence, her quiet commands, and their shared trust. Emma's mother held her daughter close, watching her quietly as she interacted with the dog. Months of preparation, patience, and guidance had culminated in this moment. The pride she felt was immeasurable. Her daughter had not only demonstrated skill, but had inspired an entire room of adults, professionals, and observers, leaving an indelible impression that would be remembered for years. The mother realized that Emma's ability to focus, communicate, and guide Rex was rare and remarkable, a gift that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. The judge concluded the session, standing to address the room one final time. "Today, we have seen an example of brilliance in its form," he said, his voice carrying both authority and admiration. "A child, through patience, observation, and quiet guidance, has demonstrated the extraordinary potential of intelligence, trust, and perseverance. Let this be a reminder that greatness often comes from unexpected places, and that brilliance can manifest in the smallest among us." Applause filled the room once more, this time sustained, genuine, and reverent. Emma's performance left a lasting impact. The spectators, officers, and lawyers had witnessed more than a police dog demonstration. They had experienced a rare display of intelligence, trust, and subtle communication. Every subtle gesture, every whispered command, every precise movement had captivated and inspired. The courtroom, which had begun the day with procedural monotony, now felt transformed, alive with the memory of a tiny girl whose focus, intelligence, and quiet authority had captivated everyone present. As the crowd began to leave, reporters lined up to ask questions, lawyers whispered among themselves, and officers discussed the extraordinary bond between child and dog. Yet through it all, Emma remained calm and composed, her hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. She had achieved something remarkable, not for attention, not for praise, but because she understood the connection she shared with Rex. Her presence, subtle yet commanding, had ensured that every movement was precise, every task completed flawlessly, and every observer captivated. Officer Daniels approached Emma's mother privately, a soft smile on his face. "Your daughter is incredible," he said quietly. "Not only is she intelligent beyond her years, but her ability to guide Rex so subtly, it's unprecedented. She's a natural leader, and today she proved it to everyone in this room." The mother's eyes filled with tears of pride, and she hugged Emma a little. Emma looked up at them both, her expression calm but proud, fully aware of the invisible influence she had wielded. Rex, still alert and responsive, stayed by Officer Daniels' side, occasionally glancing toward Emma. The bond between them, invisible to the crowd but undeniable to those who knew, had been the key to every flawless maneuver. Every pause, pivot, and retrieval had been guided by subtle cues, a secret language of intelligence and trust shared only by child and dog. The audience, though unaware of the precise mechanism, had witnessed the extraordinary result, a dog performing flawlessly under extraordinary circumstances, guided by a quiet, brilliant mind. The room eventually emptied, but the energy lingered. Lawyers, reporters, and spectators left the courthouse buzzing, recounting the story over and over. Emma's quiet intelligence and subtle guidance of Rex became the centerpiece of discussions, capturing attention far beyond the courthouse walls. The demonstration had not only shown skill but had inspired admiration, curiosity, and wonder in all who had witnessed it. It was a moment that would be remembered, retold, and celebrated for years to come. Emma, sitting quietly with her mother, finally allowed herself to relax. Her eyes sparkled with satisfaction as she looked at Rex, who wagged his tail slightly in response. The tiny gestures, the whispered commands, the patience and trust, all of it had culminated in a demonstration that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The courtroom had been transformed, not by spectacle, but by the quiet brilliance of a child and the extraordinary bond she shared with her dog. As the day concluded, Emma and Rex walked out of the courtroom together, tiny hands and attentive paws side by side. Spectators and officers watched them go, a mixture of admiration and awe in their expressions. It was clear that they had witnessed something rare and beautiful, the quiet, intelligent orchestration of brilliance by a small girl, and the perfect execution by a loyal, attentive dog. The lasting impression would remain long after the day ended, a testament to the power of trust, observation, intelligence, and the extraordinary bond between human and animal. Emma had shown that greatness could come from the most unexpected places, that brilliance could manifest in quiet, subtle ways, and that the tiniest among us could wield profound influence when guided by intelligence, patience, and trust. The courtroom, once a place of rigid procedure, had been forever transformed by a 3-year-old girl and her remarkable dog, leaving everyone present inspired, amazed, and deeply moved.